You don't belong here, and you definitely can't afford that car. The words landed loud enough to turn heads across the polished marble showroom floor, slicing through the soft jazz and quiet conversations like a blade. And for a moment, everything slowed as eyes shifted toward the man they were aimed at. Malik Jefferson didn't react, not with anger, not with embarrassment, just a stillness that felt out of place in a room built on movement and sales. He stood there in a simple dark hoodie, clean jeans, and sneakers that had seen real streets, not showroom lighting. His gaze moving slowly across the line of vehicles, not admiring them, but studying them, like he was evaluating something far beyond the price tags hanging from their mirrors. The salesman, mid-30s, pressed suit, smile sharpened by assumption, let out a quiet chuckle and gestured toward the exit as if guiding a lost customer back to reality. We've got more affordable options down the street, he added, voice dripping with polite dismissal that barely covered the judgment underneath. A couple near a silver SUV exchanged glances, one smirked, another whispered something under their breath, and just like that, the atmosphere shifted, no longer a luxury space but a stage, and Malik was the punchline they hadn't earned. He didn't move, didn't defend himself, didn't explain, because he had seen this before, not just once, but enough times to recognize the pattern in seconds. The way eyes measured you before words did, the way silence was mistaken for weakness, the way confidence in your own space could crumble the second someone decided you didn't fit their version of success. The manager noticed the pause, stepped in with a tighter smile and a louder tone. Sir, if you're not planning to purchase today, we can't have you lingering around our premium inventory. His voice carried further, designed to control the room, to re-establish authority, but it only amplified the moment. More people turned. More attention gathered, the weight of assumption pressing in from every angle. Malik finally shifted, not backward, not defensive, just a small step forward, enough to close the distance between him and the car they said he couldn't afford. His fingers brushed lightly across the hood, not possessive, not hesitant, just deliberate, like he was confirming something only he understood. The salesman's smile tightened. Please don't touch the vehicles unless you're serious. And that word, serious, hung in the air like a quiet accusation, as if seriousness had a look, a uniform, a price range. Malik's eyes lifted, calm, steady, unshaken, and for the first time, there was something behind them that didn't match the role they had assigned him. Not frustration, not anger, but clarity, the kind that comes when a moment reveals more than it hides. And as the room leaned in, waiting for him to either leave or argue, Malik reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his phone, the movement unhurried, controlled, his thumb hovering over the screen for just a second before he made the call, his voice low, almost quiet enough to miss. Yeah, I'm here. A pause, his eyes never leaving the manager now. Go ahead, start the process. Another pause, longer this time, as if something larger had just been set in motion, and somewhere in the distance of that silence, before anyone in that showroom understood what was about to unfold, the balance of power had already begun to shift. The call ended without urgency, without explanation, just a quiet confirmation that something had already begun, and Malik Jefferson slipped the phone back into his pocket as if nothing in the room had changed. But everything had. The salesman frowned slightly, the confidence in his posture cracking just enough to notice, because there was something about the way Malik stood there now, not defensive, not offended, just certain, like he was no longer a guest in the space, but something else. Entirely. The manager stepped closer, lowering his voice but sharpening his tone. Sir, I do not know who you think you are calling, but this is private property, and if you are not prepared to make a legitimate purchase, I am going to have to ask you to leave. The words were controlled, rehearsed, the kind that sounded like policy but felt personal. Malik did not respond right away. His eyes moved slowly across the showroom again, taking in the glass walls, the polished floors, the rows of vehicles positioned like trophies. He had seen places like this before, not just from the outside, but from conference tables, from acquisition reports, from numbers that told stories no one in this room would ever hear. And for a brief moment, the present blurred with a memory, a younger version of himself standing in a much smaller dealership years ago. Same look from a different face, same assumption wrapped in different words. Come back when you are ready. They had told him back then, and he remembered walking out with nothing but a promise he never spoke out loud, not to prove them wrong, but to make sure he would never need their approval again. The memory faded as quickly as it came, and Malik exhaled slowly, grounding himself back in the moment. The salesman shifted his weight, clearly irritated now. You heard him. Man, we are not here to waste time, he said, louder this time, inviting the room to agree, and a few quiet nods followed, subtle but visible, the kind of silent support that builds pressure without words. A woman near the reception desk raised her phone slightly, not filming yet, just watching more closely, sensing that something about this interaction did not fit the usual pattern. Malik finally looked directly at the manager, his expression unchanged, calm but unyielding. I am exactly where I need to be, he said, his voice even, not raised, not aggressive, just final. And that answer seemed to irritate the manager more than any argument could have, because it offered no submission, no explanation, no exit, just presence. The manager sighed, turning slightly toward the front desk. Call security, he said, not loudly, but loud enough, the words settling into the air like a decision already made. And for a second, no one moved, as if the room itself hesitated, unsure whether this situation had crossed a line or was still pretending to follow procedure. Malik did not flinch, did not step back. He simply adjusted his stance, one hand resting casually at his side, the other brushing lightly against the car again, not out of defiance, but out of ownership that no one there could yet understand. Somewhere behind the desk, a phone screen lit up, then another. A faint series of notification sounds began to ripple through the space, soft at first, easy to ignore, but growing. The receptionist glanced down at her monitor, her brow tightening slightly as she refreshed the screen. The manager noticed, irritation turning to distraction for just a moment. What is it? He asked, but she did not answer right away, her eyes scanning something that clearly was not part of her normal workflow. The salesman scoffed, still focused on Malik. Look, man, this is over. You cannot just stand here and pretend you belong, he said. And that word again, belong, as if it could define reality. Malik tilted his head slightly, not in confusion, but in quiet recognition of the pattern repeating itself. That is the difference, he said softly, almost to himself, but loud enough to be heard. I do not pretend. The manager turned back toward him, ready to escalate further, ready to end the situation the only way he knew how. But before he could speak, his own phone vibrated in his pocket. Once, then again, more insistently this time. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then pulled it out, glancing at the screen, and whatever he saw there did not match the script he had been following, because the confidence in his face shifted, not gone, but interrupted, like a crack forming beneath something he thought was solid. And across the showroom, the quiet ripple of notifications continued, subtle, building, unnoticed by most, but impossible to stop. The manager stared at his phone longer than he meant to, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes as the certainty he had just moments ago began to slip. Not gone, not shattered, but disturbed, like something underneath his control had shifted without asking for permission. He blinked once, then again, scrolling quickly as if the answer would change if he moved fast enough. The salesman noticed first, his smirk fading into something tighter, less confident. What is it? He asked, but the manager did not answer, not immediately, because whatever he was reading did not belong to the moment he thought he was in. Across the showroom, the receptionist leaned closer to her monitor, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as more alerts appeared. Internal notifications she had never seen before, subject lines marked urgent, executive, priority override, words that did not belong to a routine sales day. The soft chime of incoming messages layered over each other now, no longer subtle, no longer ignorable. Customers began to notice, heads turning not toward Malik this time, but toward the staff, toward the sudden break in their control. The woman near the desk lifted her phone fully now, recording without hesitation, sensing that whatever was unfolding was no longer a private misunderstanding, but something larger, something that demanded to be seen. Malik remained exactly where he was, unmoved, his posture relaxed but anchored, like he had already stepped into a different version of this room where the rules no longer applied the same way. He watched the manager carefully, not with hostility, but with the patience of someone who knew the timing mattered more than the reaction. The manager finally looked up, his voice lower now, less certain. "Sir, who exactly did you just call?" The question came out controlled, but it carried something new underneath it. Something closer to caution than authority. Malik did not answer right away. Instead, he glanced briefly toward the front desk where the receptionist was now whispering to a colleague. Both of them staring at the same screen, their expressions shifting from confusion to recognition. The salesman scoffed, trying to reclaim the moment. "It does not matter who he called. We are still done here," he said, louder again, forcing confidence back into his tone. But the room did not follow him this time. The energy had changed. Attention no longer centered on Malik as the problem, but on the staff as something uncertain, something unraveling. Malik's voice came calm, precise, cutting through the noise without rising above it. "You are right," he said, looking directly at the salesman now. "It does not matter who I called." A pause, just long enough to let the words settle. What matters is what happens next. The manager's phone vibrated again in his hand. A new message, then another, and this time he did not hesitate to open it, his eyes scanning quickly, then slowing, then stopping completely as the meaning caught up with him. His posture straightened instinctively, but not out of confidence, out of shock. The salesman stepped closer, trying to read his expression. "What is going on?" he pressed, but the manager still did not answer, because across the showroom, other devices were lighting up now. A tablet near the finance desk refreshed automatically, a system update prompt, appearing where there had been none before, access levels changing in real time, quiet, invisible to most, but impossible to reverse. The receptionist spoke finally, her voice hesitant but clear enough to carry. There is a corporate notice," she said, eyes still locked on the screen. The manager turned sharply toward her. "What notice?" he demanded, but the urgency in his voice no longer matched authority. Matched someone trying to catch up to something already in motion. She swallowed slightly, reading carefully. "Ownership review in progress. Executive acquisition order initiated." The words sounded unreal even as she said them, like they belonged to another building, another company, not this showroom, not this moment. The salesman let out a short laugh, dismissive. "That has nothing to do with us," he said quickly, almost too quickly, but no one echoed him. No one confirmed it, because the manager's face had already told a different story. His eyes moved slowly back to Malik, and for the first time since this began, he did not look at him like a customer, or a problem, or someone who did not belong. He looked at him like a variable he had failed to account for. Malik met his gaze evenly. No triumph, no anger, just certainty, and in that silence, as the notifications continued to ripple through the showroom and the structure of control quietly shifted beneath their feet, one truth settled into the room without needing to be spoken. This was no longer about a car. It never was. "Wait, I have seen that name before." The voice did not come from the manager or the salesman. It came from behind the front desk, softer but sharp enough to cut through the tension that had settled over the showroom. All eyes shifted again, but this time not toward Malik, toward the young employee standing half a step back from the monitor, her badge slightly tilted, her confidence not fully formed, but rising anyway. She hesitated for just a second under the weight of the room, then stepped forward. "Malik Jefferson," she said, reading it carefully like confirming something she did not expect to say out loud. "That name is on the corporate acquisition list." The words landed differently than anything before, not loud, not aggressive, but heavy, like a piece of truth that did not need volume to carry. The salesman laughed immediately, too quickly, too sharp. "Corporate list? What does that even mean?" he snapped, trying to pull the room back into something familiar, something dismissible, but the employee did not step back this time. She looked directly at the manager, not Malik, not the customers, the manager. "It means this location has been flagged for review for weeks," she continued, her voice steadier now. "And that name, it is attached to the file." Silence followed, not empty, but charged, the kind that builds when something undeniable begins to surface. The manager's jaw tightened, his grip on the phone shifting slightly, as if he could hold on to control by force of habit alone. "You are out of line," he said, but the words lacked weight now, lacked the authority they had carried just minutes ago, because the room had already begun to listen differently. The customers who had been whispering before were no longer whispering. They were watching openly. The woman recording stepped closer, angling her phone toward the front desk, toward the employee who had just spoken. Because something had changed, the narrative was no longer about a man who did not belong. It was about a system that might have misjudged the wrong person. Malik remained still, his expression unchanged, but his eyes moved briefly toward the employee, a subtle acknowledgement. Not gratitude, not approval, just recognition, like he had expected this moment to arrive. The salesman scoffed again, louder this time, trying to regain ground. Even if that is true, it does not change anything. He still cannot afford the car, he said, doubling down on the one thing he thought still held. But the words sounded smaller now, weaker, as if they belonged to a version of the situation that no longer existed. The manager exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting between Malik and the screen behind the desk, calculations happening in real time. Not about a sale, but about consequences, about position, about what it meant if even a fraction of what he was seeing was real. Pull up the file, he said finally, his voice lower, controlled again but no longer confident. The employee nodded, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. The screen refreshed, then loaded something new, something deeper than the standard system interface. Access levels unlocking that she had never touched before, lines of information appearing one after another. And there it was, clear, undeniable. The name again, Malik Jefferson, attached to a series of documents marked acquisition authority, executive clearance, majority stake pending. The manager stepped closer, his eyes scanning the screen, reading faster now, then slowing as the meaning settled in fully. The salesman leaned in as well, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion, then to something closer to disbelief. That cannot be right, he muttered, but no one answered him, because the screen did not argue. It did not hesitate. It simply displayed the truth as it existed. The employee looked up, her voice quieter now, almost careful. It says the acquisition order was initiated today, she said, 30 minutes ago. The timing hung in the air like a final piece clicking into place. The call, the stillness, the certainty, it all aligned. The manager's shoulders straightened again, but not out of authority. Out of realization, his eyes lifted slowly, from the screen to Malik. And this time there was no dismissal, no assumption, just a quiet understanding forming too late to undo anything. Malik met his gaze calmly, then spoke, his voice even, precise, leaving no room for interpretation. You were right about one thing, he said, pausing just long enough for the room to lean in. I did not come here to buy a car. The silence tightened, every sound in the showroom fading into the background as the weight of what he was about to say settled in. I came to see if this place was worth owning. And in that moment, the balance shifted completely, not with noise, not with force, but with the quiet certainty of power finally revealed. The silence did not break right away. It stretched, thick and heavy, as every person in the showroom tried to process what had just been said, not just the words, but the certainty behind them. The manager stood still, eyes locked on Malik Jefferson as if searching for something that would undo the moment, some sign that this was a misunderstanding, a mistake, anything that could return control back to where it had been. But there was nothing. Malik did not move, did not explain, did not soften. The truth he had just placed in the center of the room, and that was what made it undeniable. The salesman shifted backward slightly, the confidence that once filled his posture now replaced with something uncertain, something fragile. That does not make sense, he said under his breath. But the words had no weight, no direction. They simply fell into the silence and disappeared across the showroom. The receptionist's screen refreshed again, new lines of confirmation appearing, internal approvals, executive signatures, timestamps that aligned perfectly with the moment Malik had made his call. The employee who had spoken earlier stepped closer to the screen, reading carefully. Then again, as if repetition might change the reality. But it did not. It is finalized, she said quietly, almost to herself, but loud enough for the manager to hear. And that word settled everything. Finalized, no debate, no delay, no reversal. The manager inhaled slowly, his shoulders rising then falling as the weight of the situation pressed in fully. he turned toward Malik again. But this time his posture had changed, not dramatically, not submissively, but enough to show that the balance of power had shifted beyond recovery. Mr. Jefferson, he began, the name now spoken with care, with intention, but Malik raised a hand slightly, not to interrupt harshly, just enough to pause the words before they formed into something performative, something too late. You already told me who I was, Malik said calmly, his voice steady, not elevated, not emotional, just clear. You just chose not to believe it. The manager's mouth closed, the sentence he had been about to deliver, dissolving before it could exist, because there was no response to that, no correction, no justification that could erase what had already happened in front of witnesses, in front of a room that had seen everything unfold in real time. The customers who had once stood quietly now watched openly, some with disbelief, others with quiet satisfaction, as if the shift they had felt building was now undeniable. The woman recording lowered her phone slightly, not because the moment was over, but because it had reached something deeper than spectacle, something that did not need exaggeration to be understood. The salesman cleared his throat, trying to recover, trying to rebuild something from what was left. Look, if there has been some kind of misunderstanding, we can fix this, he said quickly, the words coming out faster now, less controlled. We can get you the car, any car you want. But Malik's gaze moved to him slowly, not harsh, not angry, just final. You already showed me what you offer, he replied, and the sentence landed heavier than anything else in the room. Because it was not about the car, it never had been. It was about the standard, the respect, the way people were measured before they spoke, before they had the chance to define themselves. The employee behind the desk looked between them, then back to the screen, then finally at Malik, something like understanding settling in her expression, not just of what was happening, but why it mattered. Malik took a step forward, not toward the exit, not away from the situation, but deeper into it, into the space that had tried to push him out, his voice steady as he spoke again. This was never about whether I could afford the car, he said, his eyes moving briefly across the room, acknowledging everyone who had watched, who had judged, who had remained silent. It was about whether this place deserved my business. He paused, letting that settle, letting the weight of it reach every corner of the showroom. And now I have my answer. The manager lowered his gaze slightly, not fully, but enough to show that he understood the finality of what had been decided, because in that moment, the transaction had already happened, not at the register, not with paperwork, but with something far more permanent. The transfer of control, the shift of authority, the quiet collapse of a system that had revealed its flaws at the exact wrong time. And as the room stood still, suspended between what it had been and what it was becoming, Malik Jefferson did not raise his voice, did not celebrate, did not demand anything more, because the outcome did not require it. It had already been decided the moment they told the wrong man he did not belong. The air in the showroom did not return to normal. It shifted into something unfamiliar, something quieter but heavier, like every word now carried consequence. The manager stood there with his hands at his sides, no longer directing the room, no longer controlling the pace, just existing inside a moment he could not reverse. Malik Jefferson remained composed, his presence steady, unshaken, as if nothing about this outcome surprised him, because it did not. He had seen this pattern too many times to expect anything different. What mattered was not the insult, not even the exposure. It was what followed, the measure of a place when it realized it had been wrong. The receptionist's screen updated again, a new notification flashing across the top, bold, unmistakable, ownership transfer complete, system authority updated, access levels reassigned. The words were simple but absolute, and they moved through the room faster than any voice could. The employee behind the desk took a small step back, not out of fear, but out of awareness, like she had just witnessed the exact second something changed forever. The manager's phone buzzed again, but this time he did not rush to check it. He already knew what it would say. Instead, he looked at Malik, really looked this time, not at his clothes, not at his presence, but at him. And in that moment, there was no assumption left, only recognition. What would you like us to do? He asked. And the question came out carefully, not as a command, not as a negotiation, but as something closer to accountability. Malik let the silence sit for a second before answering, not to create tension, but because the answer mattered. Start by listening, he said, his voice calm, even, carrying across the room without force. Not just to me, to everyone who walks through that door. His eyes moved briefly toward the entrance, then back to the staff, because what happened here today was not new. It was just visible. The words settled into the space, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just true. And that made them impossible to ignore. The salesman lowered his gaze, the earlier confidence now gone completely, replaced with the quiet realization of what his words had triggered. He opened his mouth slightly, as if to speak, to apologize, to explain, but nothing came out, because there was no version of this moment where those words would be enough. Malik turned slightly, his attention shifting to the rest of the showroom, the customers who had watched, the ones who had stayed silent, the ones who had started to understand. This is how it starts, he said, not addressing anyone directly, but speaking to the room as a whole. A look, a comment, a decision made before a conversation even begins. He paused, letting the idea settle. And every time it happens, it costs more than a sale. The manager nodded slowly, not in agreement as much as an acknowledgement, like someone finally seeing a pattern they had ignored for too long. Behind them, the system screens continued updating, internal dashboards refreshing, employee permissions shifting in real time, the quiet mechanics of power moving without needing attention. The employee who had spoken earlier stepped forward again, her voice steady now, no hesitation left. The system is asking for new authorization codes, she said, looking at Malik, not the manager, and that shift alone said everything. Malik nodded once, simple, direct. I will handle it, he replied, reaching for his phone again, not as a reaction, but as a continuation, the same calm control he had shown from the beginning, because for him, this was not escalation, it was execution. He entered a code, confirmed a prompt, and within seconds the system responded, access granted, ownership verified. A quiet confirmation that what had been spoken was now fully recognized at every level. The manager exhaled slowly, the last piece of doubt leaving his posture, replaced by something more grounded, more aware. Understood, he said, and this time the word carried weight, not authority, but responsibility. Malik looked at him one last time, his expression unchanged, but his presence undeniable. Good, he said, simply, and with that, the room settled into its new reality, not with noise, not with celebration, but with the quiet understanding that everything had just shifted, not because someone raised their voice, but because someone refused to lower their standard. The room did not erupt. It did not explode into noise or chaos. Instead, it settled into something far more powerful, a quiet recalibration where every person present understood that the hierarchy they walked in with no longer existed. Malik Jefferson stood at the center of it, not elevated, not announced, just recognized, and that recognition changed everything. The manager straightened his posture again, but this time it was different, not authority, not performance, but alignment, as if he was finally standing in the role he should have been in from the beginning. We will correct this, he said carefully, not loudly, not defensively, just clearly. Malik's gaze held on him for a moment, measuring not the words, but the intent behind them, because intent was what had been missing before, and intent was what would define what happened next. Correction is not a statement, Malik replied, his voice steady, carrying across the showroom with ease. It is a pattern. He took a slow step forward, closing the distance between himself and the front desk, not to dominate, not to intimidate, but to make something clear without needing force. And patterns do not change because of one moment. They change because someone decides they will not repeat. The words settled deeply, not just with the manager, but with everyone listening. The salesman shifted again, his shoulders slightly lowered, his earlier tone completely gone, replaced with the quiet weight of realization. He looked at Malik, then down at the floor, then back up again, searching for something to say that would make sense of what had just unfolded, but nothing came, because there was no version of this that could be undone with a sentence. The employee who had spoken earlier stepped closer to Malik now, not hesitating, not unsure, her voice steady. The updated system is requesting leadership confirmation for all staff roles, she said, holding the tablet slightly toward him. And in that moment, the shift became visible in a new way, not just in perception, but in structure. The authority that had once been assumed now required validation, and it was no longer coming from where it used to. Malik glanced at the screen briefly, then back at the room, his eyes moving from one person to another, not judging, not accusing, just observing, as if taking a full measure of what stood in front of him. Keep the ones who understand what just happened, he said simply, and the sentence landed with precision, not emotional, not exaggerated, but exact. The manager nodded slowly, absorbing the instruction not as an order to execute blindly, but as a responsibility to interpret correctly, because this was no longer about positions or titles, it was about awareness, about who could carry forward something better than what had just been exposed. A customer near the back, who had been silent the entire time, spoke quietly to the person beside him. "I have never seen anything like this." And the response came just as quietly. "That is because most people never get to see the moment things actually change." The words lingered, unnoticed by most, but true all the same. Malik turned slightly toward the car that had started it all, the one he had been told he could not afford, his hand resting lightly on its surface again, not possessive, not symbolic, just present, and for a brief second, the entire situation came full circle, not as a contradiction, but as clarity. "You judged the wrong thing," he said, not looking at anyone in particular, but speaking into the space that had formed around him. "You looked at appearance and missed authority." The manager lowered his gaze slightly, not out of defeat, but out of understanding, because the statement did not accuse, it revealed, and revelation carried more weight than any argument ever could. Malik stepped back then, just one step, creating space again, returning the room to itself, but not to what it had been, to something new, something more aware. The employee behind the desk adjusted her stance, her movements more deliberate now, her posture reflecting a different kind of confidence, one built not on assumption, but on clarity. The system screens continued to update quietly in the background, final confirmations locking into place, roles being redefined without announcement, without spectacle, just quietly, effectively. Malik looked toward the entrance for a moment, then back at the manager, his voice calm as he spoke one final time in that space. "This is where it starts," he said. "Not with me, with what you choose to do next." And with that, the room held its breath, not in fear, not in tension, but in recognition, because for the first time, everyone understood that what had just happened was not the end of something. It was the beginning of what would replace it. No one spoke right away, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that mattered had already been said, and now the room had to live with it. The manager turned slowly toward the team, his voice steady but different now, stripped of performance, grounded in something real. "Everyone, pause what you are doing," he said, and this time the instruction carried without resistance, not because of authority, but because of clarity. Conversations stopped, movement slowed, and the showroom that once buzzed with quiet sales energy now stood still, attentive, aware. The salesman remained near the car, his posture no longer rigid, no longer defensive, just present, absorbing the shift he had helped trigger. The employee behind the desk stepped forward with the tablet again, her voice calm. "The system requires immediate acknowledgement of updated leadership structure," she said, and without hesitation. She handed it not to the manager, but to Malik, the gesture subtle, but powerful, marking the final transfer not just in data, but in reality. Malik accepted it with the same calm he had carried from the beginning. No rush, no display, just quiet control. His eyes scanned the screen briefly. Then he confirmed the prompt with a single tap. And just like that, the system locked it in, not with sound, not with announcement, but with finality, across the showroom. Devices refreshed one more time, employee permissions updated, administrative controls reassigned. The invisible framework that held everything together had shifted completely. The manager took a breath, then stepped slightly to the side, not stepping down, but making space, acknowledging what had already happened. "We will begin restructuring immediately," he said, his voice clear, directed not just at the staff, but at the standard they were now expected to meet. The salesman looked up, his expression uncertain. "What does that mean for us?" he asked, and the question carried more than curiosity. It carried accountability. Malik turned his gaze toward him, not harsh, not cold, just direct. "It means you decide who you are from this point forward," he said, and the answer did not offer comfort. It offered responsibility. The salesman nodded slowly. The weight of that settling in deeper than any reprimand could. Nearby, one of the customers spoke quietly, almost to himself. "This is what accountability looks like." And the words lingered, quiet but true. The employee who had first spoken up adjusted her stance again, her confidence now fully present, not forced, not borrowed, but earned in real time. She looked at Malik, then at the manager, then back to the system. Ready, prepared, aware, Malik stepped away from the desk, moving slowly through the showroom, not inspecting, not judging, just present, his presence. Alone now enough to shift the energy of the space. The same customers who had once watched him with doubt now watched him with something entirely different. Respect, not given, but realized. He paused briefly near the entrance, turning back just slightly, not to address the room as a whole, but to leave something behind, something that would remain after he walked out. "What happened here today was not about me," he said, his voice calm, steady. "It was about what you chose to believe before. You had the facts." He let the sentence settle, then added, "And what you choose to do now will define everything that comes after." The manager nodded once, not in agreement, but in understanding, because this was no longer about correcting a mistake. It was about rebuilding a standard, one decision at a time. Malik held the moment for just a second longer, then turned and walked toward the exit, not rushed, not dramatic, just steady, controlled, as if he had always known exactly how this would end. And behind him, the showroom did not return to what it had been. It moved forward into something new, something quieter, something sharper, where every interaction would now carry the memory of this moment, not as a warning, but as a standard. And as the doors closed behind him, the final piece of silence settled in, not empty, but complete, because the system had already changed. And this time, it was not going back. Outside, the air felt different, not because the city had changed, but because something inside that showroom had. Malik Jefferson stepped onto the pavement without looking back, his pace steady, unhurried, as if the outcome had already been written long before he walked through those doors. Behind him, through the glass, the staff could still see him, not as the man they misjudged, but as the standard they now had to measure themselves against. Inside, no one rushed to fill the silence. No one returned immediately to business as usual, because there was no usual anymore. The manager stood near the center of the showroom, his eyes moving across his team, seeing them differently now, not as roles, not as positions, but as choices waiting to be made. "We start over," he said finally, his voice firm, grounded, and this time no one questioned it, because they understood what it meant. Not a reset of numbers, not a new sales strategy, but a shift in how they saw every person who walked through that door. The salesman remained still for a moment longer, then slowly adjusted his stance, his posture no longer built on assumption, but on awareness. He looked toward the entrance where Malik had exited, then back at the car he had once guarded with judgment, and for the first time, he saw it for what it really was, not a symbol of status, but a test of how people were treated before they proved anything. The employee who had spoken up earlier returned to the system, her movements precise, confident, no hesitation left, because she had already crossed the line between watching and acting, and there was no going back from that. The screens continued to reflect the new structure, names shifting, permissions aligning, a quiet architecture of change settling into place, one decision at a time. A customer near the back exhaled slowly, turning to leave, but not before saying, "That is how it should be." And though it was said softly, it carried, not as approval, but as truth. Outside, Malik paused briefly at the curb, his reflection faint in the glass behind him, not to admire, not to reconsider, just to acknowledge the moment for what it was, not a victory, not revenge, but correction, the kind that does not need volume to be understood. He adjusted his jacket slightly, then continued forward, blending back into the rhythm of the city. No entourage, no announcement, just presence, because real power never needed to introduce itself. It revealed itself when necessary, and only when necessary. Inside the showroom, the manager walked toward the front desk, his steps deliberate, his expression focused. Every customer gets the same respect, he said, not as a reminder, but as a rule. No assumptions, no shortcuts. The team nodded, not out of obligation, but because they had seen exactly what happened when those rules were ignored. The salesman took a breath, then stepped toward a new customer who had just entered, his voice measured, his tone different. "Welcome in. How can I help you today?" And there was no performance in it. No hidden judgment, just a clean start, the kind that should have been there all along. The employee glanced at the system one last time, confirming everything was aligned, then looked up, her posture steady, ready for what came next, because now she knew what it meant to stand on the right side of a moment. And that knowledge changed how she would move forever. The showroom lights reflected off the cars the same way they always had, but the space felt different, not louder, not brighter, just clearer, like something unnecessary had been stripped away, leaving only what mattered. And somewhere beyond the glass, Malik Jefferson continued down the street, already focused on what was next. Because he did not come to prove anything. He came to reveal something, and he had done exactly that, without raising his voice, without asking for permission, without needing to be recognized first, because the truth did not need an introduction, it only needed a moment, and when that moment came, it changed everything.